in Municipal Finance Authority short-term funds such as this will have a similar timing difference in terms of unrealized gains or losses at the reporting. The impact to the District of Lantzville is that it's reported an unrealized loss of approximately $15,000 in the 2016 year. So the annual surplus is actually understated by that amount in comparison to a cost basis in that those investments are reported at fair. The second item that we've noted in our report relates to the accrual for estimated refunds for parcel tax and homeowner grants. That represents approximately a $50,000 liability within the 2016 financial statements. In terms of our audit procedures, we have reviewed the methodology that management has undertaken to determine the value or the approximate value of the maximum amount of refunds that could take place in respect to the affected properties. We did not note any audit misstatements or any outstanding issues related to that matter in respect to the 2016 financial statements. The only other matter that I thought I would highlight is in respect to future accounting standards. There's a fair amount taking place with the local government standards that are applicable for all governments in Canada. Probably the most significant being asset retirement obligations. You'll recall last year there was a new standard implemented for contaminated sites, which addressed those surplus sites that had a potential liability and known commitment by the district to remediate or incur future costs. The scope of that standard, as I mentioned, only impacted surplus sites, whereas the new projected or proposed standard takes into account all properties. So it will require some research and evaluation by management across all local governments to determine if there is any known obligation related to contamination or any other potential remediation work. One important item that many organizations are investigating or thinking about are things such as asbestos. That was previously excluded from the Step 1 standard, contaminated sites, where it would be included into this new proposed standard. There are a couple other standards that are more recently to be implemented, so 2018-2019, in regards to contractual rights, contingent assets, and related party transactions. Those are primarily disclosure standards, so they may result in additional note disclosure to the financial statements. And again, will require a little bit of research as to what the potential impact could be of those standards. Those are really the highlights of the report that I wanted to point to, but happy to address any questions.
Thank you. Council members, any questions, comments? Councilor Geselbrecht.
If I could turn to page 10 of our agenda.
Councilor Geselbrecht.
Yes, thank you. I could get you to turn to page 10 of our agenda items, which is page 6 of the report. And I note that it states that during the year, management noted inconsistencies in billing for mobile home parks. Upon further investigation, management determined certain residents were overcharged parcel tax from 2003 to 2016 and underclaimed the maximum eligible home grant. A legal opinion was obtained regarding the potential liability to the district to refund overpayments. That the potential amount of refund of $50,284 was calculated. This is the number. So through the chair to staff, does this $50,000 represent both the homeowner grant error as well as the parcel tax error? And if not, what is the total amount?
The amount there, the $50,284, represents both errors, the homeowner grant error and the 3 parcel tax errors.
Supplementary through the chair, is that the final amount, or is that only for 2016? And if it's only for 2016, is there more to come?
Through the chair, it is the total amount for all of those errors for all the years that were impacted, including any interest. So that is the amount set up as a liability to potentially refund all of those amounts. It does mean going back to 2003, so there is always the possibility that we will not be able to find certain people, or certain people won't come forward to receive those refunds given the time frame. But what we have is a plan in place that's coming up on the agenda later this evening on how we can do the best to track all of these people down and have that full amount refunded. At this point in time, that is the full amount that we are aware of for any errors in relation to these 4 items, the 3 parcel taxes and the homeowner grant.
Final supplementary to Ms. Lee. It says that this amount goes back to 2003 to 2016. Now, is this something that our auditors ought to have picked up over the years, that this was being incorrectly charged to the homeowners, or how could we have prevented this?
We apply generally a risk-based approach to our audit, which means we would look to the areas where there potentially could be a misstatement that would change the decision of the users of these financial statements. You'll see that the amounts ranged from $0 to $514 per year per owner. And so that magnitude of discrepancy generally wouldn't be something that we would note in any individual year. The cumulative amount certainly is larger, but in any given year we would look to have the differences from previous year varied significantly that it would cause us to investigate further.
Thank you.
Councillor Colson.
Thank you. So further to that thread, I'm concerned about, is our level of materiality incorrect? Because I understand as discrete amounts they're small, but accumulating over time it becomes significant. And there's a third set of refunds we're considering that hasn't been added to this. Council has since made a decision to hire a deputy financial officer at a fairly significant wage to help identify these issues. So it just adds to the net cost going to the residents. But more specifically, on page 15, we speak to internal controls necessary to ensure that the statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. And so if we can't detect errors at that level, how do we disseminate if it's fraud, right? And I'm not suggesting it was. In this case, it was an error. But if our internal controls aren't picking up errors of this magnitude, fraud could be occurring too. So how does an audit fit into the internal controls we have to make sure that we have a suitable system of oversight?
The internal control structure of an organization is really dependent on the reporting mechanisms in place and the procedures established by management and overseen by council or board or whatever the organization is. When we're conducting our audit, we determine in discussion with management, in review of the minutes to meetings, again identifying where those potential risk areas could be. In this situation, the risk related to potential homeowner grant underclaims and parcel tax is generally not identified as a high risk, because if residents have overpaid, they are presumed to monitor their own payments and to self-identify. So generally the risk related to revenue is not necessarily an overstatement, rather an understatement.
Yeah, so thank you. But a resident doesn't know the details of the calculation, they just get the bill. And then they look at a deviation, so if one year it's here and then next year it's 2 times that, that flags a difference, but otherwise you just get a bill and pay it. So the residents can't be expected to pick up those errors. Council, ultimately we have final, oversight over what occurs. We don't see those level of detail, so something's flawed. And but the other point I'll bring forward on page 6 as well, it says, during the year management noted inconsistencies. it wasn't noted during that year. This has gone back years ago. It was flagged, and nothing was done about it. So that's a problem.
Councillor Hayman.
Couple of questions. I see materiality is 80,000. Who sets materiality this year?
Again, we establish materiality based on the risk of the organization and discussion with management. I believe we had brought forward some information to council as well during the course of the year. So the three parties combined will establish that materiality.
Last year it was just staff, so it's good to see there's more input. With regards to the issue at hand, this issue has been made aware to staff for a long period of time. It's been out there for quite a while. My concern is, how did you deal with the side? We were told a number of months ago that the sewer capital fund has now been understated. And so it doesn't end at 2016. We were actually given the number between 150 and 200,000 is what it was going to cost the residents of this community. So how are we quantifying? We're paying back the residents some money, but how are we quantifying what is still yet to come? You know, have we reflected what's in the financial statements for those additional costs that basically are going to have to be paid for 2017 and 18 that now we're not getting billed to somebody because this error occurred? So that's a pretty significant number. There's our understated revenue.
Right, yes. Yeah. So where you would see that in the financial statements, again, these are kind of 2016 and historical looking, whereas the impact I think you're concerned of is 2017 and going forward. So the position of the sewer capital funds is disclosed within these 2016.
But there's been no quantification of or calculation of what we're going to be out in future years.
Not within these financial statements because they report to December 31st, 2016. Is there anything further you want to comment on? I mean, we know that management's been reviewing this issue in a fair amount of detail and has quantified both historical and projected differences.
It's the projected that I was thinking it should have been in a note to the financial statement so the reader is aware that there is this additional revenue source that they've lost due to error, which is significant. It's probably greater than materiality.
Okay. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Yes, I agree with both councillors Haim and Coulson that this has been a long-standing issue. We became aware of it, this council, last year, and thanks to Director of Finance Jeannie Beauchamp, she drew it to our attention, and we dealt with it in the sense that we recommended staff look into it, get a legal opinion. So through chair to staff, I note that a legal opinion was obtained. Can you give me the amount of money that we've spent for both the HOG and the parcel tax opinion? And as well, what sort of hours have staff spent in discovering, remedying, and going after this problem to date?
So through the chair, the legal costs to date right now that actually go to the end of 2016 are approximately $20,000. We have not received the invoices for any work completed in 2017. Regarding the hours for the homeowner grant error, none of these hours were tracked as it went. It's based on an estimate with various levels of employees involved. We estimated 177 hours for the homeowner grant error and 220 hours for the parcel tax error. That is to date. There will be a significant amount of time involved in the upcoming months as we start processing all of the refund payments as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Coulson.
Sorry, so back to the sewer component. So there's a lost revenue piece. There's also a repayment piece, or are we just concerned on lost revenue? That's a question to the staff.
Through the chair, could I request some further clarity?
Are you talking in relation to the financial statements?
Well, I'm just trying to get my head around how we're framing it. So if we're repaying funds, are we actually starting at zero and repaying money, or are we just drawing that out of lost revenue down the road? to net it out? Because ultimately I'm wondering, I'll just keep rambling then, do we have to record it as some sort of contingent liability?
So through the chair, with the various areas, so for the homeowner grant era, a portion of it is being funded by the province. They are going back 6 years in funding that, so there will be no cost to the district other than the interest during those years. Prior years from that are coming out of general surplus. For the 3 parcel taxes, the 1 sewer parcel tax will come out of sewer surplus. The garbage and recycling and the regional district will come out of general surplus. That will go towards funding it.
Okay, thank you.
For, I guess, the second part, that was to do how it gets recorded on the statements. So that is recorded as a liability, so that is set aside to refund it, so it wouldn't be, this is just a straight liability.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Hain?
Sorry, just one further question. With regards to internal controls and oversight, I would suspect the audit staff, when there's a new program introduced by the district, would do more extensive audit work in that area and would probably pick up any errors then?
Correct, yes. We would certainly obtain a thorough understanding of any new programs to determine how the transactions are being processed, what the risks are, what the internal controls are.
Further questions, comments? I've got a couple, just clarification on what staff just mentioned. So the 50,000 includes the sewer parcel tax that was incorrectly charged to some mobile home park owner or mobile home owner?
Through the chair, yes, there's 7 total impacted properties, 6 currently, that is included.
Okay, so that's all bundled in there. And just for clarification, there's been a number of comments made with respect to when these things were discovered. To my knowledge, the only one that was identified years ago and brought to staff's attention was that sewer parcel tax. It was current staff that identified the errors revolving around garbage and the treatment of the mobile homes in relation to those other taxes. So it wasn't all identified earlier. Some of the things were related to Ms. Beauchamp and her knowledge. Just a question for the auditor. Now I know materiality this year is set to $80,000. What was it last year?
It was 80,000.
It was 80,000 last year as well. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Take off your sweater.
Let's open the window.
Okay, so with regards to it, there's an expectation of approval of the financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2016 by council.
I move the council approve the audited financial statements for the fiscal for the year ending December 31st, 2016, as presented by KPMG.
Seconded by, thank you, Councillor Swain. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Lenore.
Thanks.
Okay, which gets us to the public input period. Speak up to 2 minutes, providing comment regarding items listed on the agenda, and please state your name and address for the record. Yes.
It's Joan Moody, 7313 Millard Drive. I have several questions throughout the agenda, which I thought maybe don't have to be answered now, but could be maybe mentioned or discussed when they get to that subject. The first one is on page 3, which is the notice of motion by Councillor Wilson. I wonder when we get to that if he could maybe give me a definition of what zoning, item number 4, zoning lift means. I didn't quite understand that. My next one was on page 61. There was 2 items. This is the council meeting minutes from April 24. I was wondering if when we get to approving them, staff could explain. It says the meeting closed to the public and then the meeting reopened except with all council present except for Mayor Hain, Councillors Colson and Hain in attendance. And I was wondering, does that mean that those 3 individuals were not public during the whole time of the in-camera meeting? And then the other item I have on that page is the announcement, number 2. It says that subject to the outcome of the trial, council has agreed. And I was wondering if someone could discuss what that means, subject to the outcome of the trial. that some fees would be paid. I didn't understand that. My next one was page 67 at the top, and this is to do with the rezoning amendment. And it says here that the applicant will be required to construct a sidewalk along a portion of the property. And as everybody knows, we don't have sidewalks in Mansfield, so I went and looked up Schedule B, and it says that sidewalks shall be installed. So I was just curious, maybe when we get to that rezoning, if the planner could tell me what kind of sidewalks we would be getting. And my next one was page 85, which is the Parks and Rec meeting minutes draft. And it was item D, under sports courts. I see that they have recommended or suggested that the paints on the tennis courts be dual painted for tennis and pickleball, which is great, because I like to play pickleball. But I was curious, they also recommended that staff monitor the use of the tennis courts, pickleball court, and I was wondering how that was actually going to happen. Whether they were going to hire people to sit at the court or how they were going to decide what the use was. And my last question was item 2 on that page about My Town Day. It says that $10,000 budget ends in 2017, and I was wondering if that, does that mean we're not having any more funds set aside for future My Town Days? Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional input with regards to items on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the minutes. So the first one are the April 19th, 2017 special council meeting minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Geselbrecht. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the April the 24th, 2017, and note that item 7B, there should be an adjustment with regards to the individual name. It mentions on there a David Bloomfield, 6931 Roslyn, and it should instead have Mr. Brian Dempsey, 6930 Owen Road.
Sorry, where are we? Page on?
Page 60 of the agenda.
Under which
Oh,
item?
okay.
It's under public clarification input period. There should be a change on the name of the individual there. Mentions Mr. Bloomfield.
So move as amended.
By Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Swain. Discussion. There were some comments made with respect to some of the contents with regards to the standpoint of the meeting being closed and then the meeting itself being reopened. Myself, due to a potential conflict, it would be the reason why I left the meeting itself at that time. Councillor Hayne, Councillor Coulson?
Same thing.
Same thing? Okay. So in that respect there, we were not in attendance for the whole meeting. Councillor Coulson?
I wasn't there for the whole meeting.
Okay. And then the other one I cannot comment on with regards to the announcements due to the fact that I'm in conflict in relation to that one. So questions were raised about the announcements from closed meetings, item number 2. As I mentioned, I cannot comment. I'm not sure if anybody else wishes to or... Okay. Sorry, Councillor Colclough?
Which are you referring back to?
Ms. Moody's
Yes.
comment? Yeah.
So is that a question that could be answered by staff?
No. Okay. Any further questions or comments related to those meeting minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion carried. April the 26th special council meeting minutes.
So moved.
As presented by Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Geselbrecht. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. May the 1st, 2017 special council meeting minutes as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Colclough. is seconded by Councillor Geselbrecht. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on and note we did adjust the agenda to move the presentation regarding the OCP plan review and water master plan process update by Mr. Reid of Lanark. And just following through with what Councillor Coulson's questions were earlier, note the presentation, there's opportunity for questions, but I'll kind of reiterate Councillor Coulson's concerns. I didn't see the survey or its contents at all until about 5 o'clock tonight. So in terms of kind of meaningful discussion and opportunity to question, I'd certainly like to have that opportunity once I had a chance to go through the detail. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Reid.
Thank you very much, Roberta.
Move it back just a bit.
Back.
Great, thank you.
I know council will be familiar with the slides being over there and you being, my apology. And again, I am very aware that this is fresh on your desk, very fresh on your desk. We had the results come from our independent polling agency just about a week ago, including crosstab results literally last Thursday. So, but at the same time, it's very natural for staff and council and the public to be very curious about what the results were of the survey. So my intent here tonight is simply to table the information, largely. If there's initial questions, I'll try and answer them, but we will be looking at this through the remainder of the process, and I expect everyone will be as well. It's very important information. So, Mayor and Council? Sorry.
Sorry, just a quick question. Do you want questions at the end or through as you go to the topic?
Could I ask you to note them? Just
Yeah, I'd probably wait till the end, recognizing you might be referring to specific pages in the report, et cetera, which may not be directly reflective.
Yes, exactly. And it may be easier for you and me to answer them when I can refer you to a specific page.
Yes.
So, working with the slides then, as I mentioned, we'll be probably looking at the results of this survey and the comments throughout the rest of this process. And so I wanted to start with just an update of where we are. This process diagram you've seen before, it's not changed. We're following the same methodology. The timing is evolving, but I think the end deadline is still the same. We are still hoping to complete in the fall of this year. Of course, that's up to council, what you wish to do at that time. Generally, we spent a good time in the late fall and winter thinking about what was in this survey and working hard on making it as precise and detailed and yet accessible as we could. That took a little longer than expected, but it's so important to not make mistakes in this. So that process is now bringing forward its results. There will be a period of simply reviewing the survey, but based on the results and the whole input through the process to date, we will be starting to consider what in the existing OCP, the 2005 OCP will remain, and there's a good deal of it that will, and how we might supplement that, complement it, revise it. And so we'll be getting into first the big moves on that, coming back to the public with some of the big picture results. So we are expecting a public workshop to both go through the results of the survey and go through how we think that might blend with the existing OCP as draft recommendations by mid-June is our intent, so before the summer. And then in the summer and in parallel with that, we will be working on the detailed wording, the detailed graphics, the implementation mechanisms. There's some complicated technical things that we'll be working on in the background, and then coming forward with that in July, largely to council. We'll be dormant through August, and then pick it up again in Mindtown Days, and look towards a more formal review process in the fall. So, in just tabling the survey, it was mailed March 15th and open until April 7th. There were just under 1,500 copies distributed. The number completed were 543, which is about 37%, which for this complicated a survey, as you've seen it, we're extraordinarily pleased. That's an excellent response rate. We wish it was 100%, but and our pollster tells us this is very good. There's a lot of detail in the survey. This does look at the distribution of work participants answered and also compares that to what percentage of Lanceville they represent. And so at a glance, it shows that actually geographically there's good distribution of responses, which again pleases us. It doesn't appear that any neighborhood was left out, although there are some neighborhoods that are very small, and therefore the number of participants is also very small. We also asked whether we were getting responses from owners or renters. And I think it's fair to say we're slightly underrepresented in rental responses. There's only 2%. When you look at the census profile in 2006, there was something like 11% of Lancevilleans were renting. So we wish we had a better sample from renters. But that is that follows a norm. That's often the case. Property owners seem to have a greater stake. There's three large sections to the survey. One is on fairly specific questions about land use nuances in potential development areas, the more intensive areas of Lanceville. There's a second section which tries to look at the cumulative effects of that and a community overview, and then a third section which is focused on water. And I'll deal with them in that order. Starting with the village, make sure you're oriented in the map. We're here at Town Hall right there, District Hall. This is the commercial core, which you think of as fronted on Lanceville Road and the lumber and pub property behind. There is an area here we've called the Village Lowlands, which is the flat areas at the bottom of Ware Road and the wetlands behind the school. And then Village South, which is the hillside along both sides of Ware Road. Village West, which is basically from the schoolyard, which is here west to Peterson, and up from Lanceville Road down to Lynn Drive, that area. There's 4 different areas there, and we've asked questions in 4 zones, but we've also asked first some broad questions about all of those areas. A lot of these are touched on in the existing OCP, so I'm going to highlight a little bit as I go through things that are definitely different than the existing OCP. Tree buffers are mentioned in the OCP as our water courses and wetlands. Open drainage systems is from the existing OCP. Having a trails network is in the existing OCP, although these drawings and the survey are much more specific than the existing OCP about connections and number of trails and number of buffers. The idea of housing variety, especially in the village, is in the existing OCP, but there is a slightly greater range of density that we're talking about, including buildings that are higher than 2 stories and some smaller lot subdivision. That is a divergence from the existing OCP. In the village commercial core, which is what you think of as the commercial area, the existing OCP mentions the idea of second floors and sort of 2.5 stories. This talks about maybe full 3-story buildings on the south side, that is away from the waterfront side of Lanceville Road. The existing OCP mentions shared parking, and we bring that forward again with a push to implement it. And then considering revitalization for pedestrians, streetscape, and the like. We mentioned cost and haul. It's not an immediate concern, but in the long run, would there be either an improvement to or a replacement of the functional cost and haul? When you look at the numbers, in all of these you can see a summary at the bottom. We asked for questions in 3 categories, either straightforward support of what was suggested, or straightforward don't support, so yes or no, and then a middle road, which is support with refinements, and ask people to list the refinements. As you look through these, I focused on the 2 extremes, the yes or no, but when we look at comments, we look very carefully at what would be the refinements that would be appropriate. So you're looking at over 3/4 support for these policies. In Village West, which is the area between Seaview, Schools Playfield, and Peterson Road, this looks at limiting height 1 to 2 stories, so still low rise, some multiple family, some lots as small as 0.14 of an acre and up to half an acre. Mention of cottages or more innovative, affordable styles of housing, and around 10 to 12% green space. In each of these, when we get into land use, we did go so far, because the question came up in committee, of putting out ranges of potential gross units per hectare, so density, and more meaningful to common people, ranges of potential units. The reason for ranges is that we don't, we're headed, I think, towards something like a density bonus or a negotiated arrangement where there is minimum standards we're looking for development, and then added benefits which might justify a greater number of units. And as well, we recognize that development like this will be always very approximate. We can't force a landowner to do anything, we can only allow or encourage, and so we don't pretend that we have exact numbers. They're indications. But they're enough of an indication to give people a clear sense of both character and numbers. In the Village South, 69% for the proposed directions. It's similar. This is two-story, a little bit higher density than in Village West. It's on the hillside there, on both sides of Ware Road, so 69% support. The Village Lowlands is a departure from the existing OCP. At the moment, the existing OCP does talk about support for a senior center and has like a density bonus arrangement for that. And that certainly is still supported, although it's complicated by the discussion that's going on about the Roslyn property, which would be perhaps a congregate care. Certainly, I think there's still an intent that there would be provision for seniors in the village, a full range of seniors care. This does look at the area that is very close, just back of the core here, very close to the village core, and within, therefore, walking distance, which is about 400 meters or 5 minutes. It looks at trying to keep 50% of that space, the wetlands, as green space, but also go as high as 4 stories, 3 to 4 stories. And that, because it's condo development, you're looking at 4 buildings that would have up to 200 plus units. In other words, that's 50 units a building, which is pretty standard size apartment building. People were supportive of this. A lot of the comments worry about whether 3 stories or 4 stories. There is concern about whether 4 stories would have an impact. We have looked at it, and we're sure that the trees are dramatically higher than a 4-story building, so they're not going to affect people's views in this location. That's why it's placed here, because it's a story lower than Lansdale Road, for instance. So we're sure it's not going to impact views, but there still is, we know from the comments that that is something that people are thinking about. Moving now to Upper Lansville, there's several areas there. Again, there are 4 main ones. Just to get you oriented, this is Ware Road and the Island Highway, and so that's Ware Road running up to Walls at the top here. The tracks are there. So one of the areas is what we call Clark Drive, which is, there's a mobile home park, and then there's Clark Drive at each ends of this, with the road not connecting in the middle. It includes the Creek Ravine. Hayes Road area is mainly treed right now with some housing on it. It's just above the tracks running on Ware Road. The Ronald Road area is where the reservoir is now at the top, and it's mostly cleared with some housing that has view. And then, so those are all together just above Ware Road and the Island Highway. The other one is mostly the G property, which is by Superior Road, which runs here, and the Winds is over in that area. It also includes properties that extend along Superior Road, and the reason for that is that those are actually, when you look at existing land use designations and sewer, they're in the sewer area, so it's logical that they would be a part of this package. As we go into the OCP, it's conceivable that there'll be different policies for those. In the questionnaire, we were worried about length and complexity, and so we do ask a set of questions about all of these together, because it's essentially about attitudes to development of these larger parcels in Upper Landsville. It's fair to ask, why are we concentrated on these parcels? And it's because they are, most of them are infill, especially Clark Drive and the G property area, that would potentially support extensions of water and sewer services and would therefore lower the cost to providing water in particular to residents in the Clark Drive and the Winds area. They are large enough to perhaps extend services, whereas other more far-flung small properties wouldn't have that advantage of lowering the cost of servicing. And so where there might be development in other properties, these are the ones that would be higher numbers and of greater public concern. And from the responses to the survey, that seems to be founded. When you look at the results, we asked about trade buffers between existing residential neighborhoods, trail networks, land and funding for a central neighborhood park. Contrary to the existing OCP, we do actually draw these. They're shown in location schematically. Of course, the boundaries would change in detail, but they are much more detailed than is in the existing OCP, trying to give people a sense of scale. We also looked at how many units might be generated and ranges of densities. We're looking at suggestions based on what we heard in an earlier process of a maximum of 2-story height in Upper Landsville. A lot size that's predominantly single family. People have been saying, lots of people have been saying they'd like to see smaller lot sizes mixed in with half an acre. Not everybody by any means. That certainly is ongoing discussion throughout Landsville and Upper Landsville in particular. Again, a lot of people we heard from earlier were interested in including some multiple family up there and more innovative forms, but again, that's an ongoing dialogue. I think it's fair to say there is a little bit more concern or dialogue in Upper Landsville about that range of housing than there is in the village area. But we were frankly surprised at how open even Upper Landsville was to a range of housing type. But I think our interpretation is they're open to a range of housing type. I think having all of any one thing is not what the community wants. They want the mix. And that's going to be our challenge in how will we achieve that. So it's more subtle thinking, I think, than is in the existing. Because the areas are very large, the numbers get to be very large. You're looking at a range of 490 to 590 new units. And that's just a big number, and people react to that number. But nevertheless, you can see the support. It's not as high as in the village, but it's still very significant. We looked at the industrial area, which is running along parallel to the Island Highway. The question was whether there should be any expansion of that, and we looked at the area that's between Ware Road and the existing industrial. Whether that would be a park and ride or limited industrial or commercial, certainly not heavy industrial, would be lighter, service oriented. The premise would be that there would be a strong buffer. We don't want to change the character of the Ware Road intersection, at least not for the worse, we want it for the better. So we still want anything to be hidden. A lot of comments were about improving the buffer that's sort of non-existent there now between the highway and improving generally the quality of the industrial area. And as we know, it's not serviced by water or sewer, but maybe in the years to come, and that would help. Very, very strong support for improvements around that and a recognition of the importance of the tax base. Certainly in the existing OCP, ALR areas and farming in the community are highly supported. This question was about where there are existing areas that are farm-like or open space that are not in the ALR, and there's one example there on Peterson, between Landsville Road and Peterson, so that's 2 lots. Right now, that would be subdividable in half-acre lots with not much other option, sort of a rezoning. So we just asked, well, we still have the ability for people to subdivide in half-acre lots, but what if we were to allow them to cluster the buildings in a small area of the land and keep the rest in a non-subdivided open space, ideally in pasture at least. And so we were simply asking the question, again, strong support for that, with some very good comments about well, how much greenhouse and would there be smells and other caveats that we would need to address. And then in terms of development, the East Landsville Care Precinct, which, the Ryland property is a core of it, but it's also other lands that are around it and between it and the Island Highway. So what we were trying to look at was knowing, yes, there is a landowner proposal, but there's also, it's not just that land, it's the whole neighborhood. We were trying to get a sense from the community of how they felt about that corner. The parameters were, tree buffers between it and adjacent residential, which is in the Old Road neighborhood. Perhaps a small neighborhood park. People said there's also Pioneer Park, so we don't need to do too much. Trail connections integrating with the city and Landsville. All water and sewer utilities. And then the thought was, in terms of land use, to put out to people, what do you think about seniors' care in that location, but also things that might go with that, like childcare, medical center, small vet, places of worship. The idea being service-oriented uses that would not compete with the commercial use that we think belongs down here in the core. So not a restaurant, for instance, that sort of thing, other than within a seniors center. Surprising amount of support, frankly. There is support, and this is one, there are detailed neighborhood comments, so it's interesting to look through the bigger document, which has a breakdown by neighborhood. And there was support even in the immediate neighborhood, which frankly I find surprising, but it's there. We also brought forward both the existing OCP development permits and ideas on natural areas and character protection, but also suggesting some additions to those. The idea of these additions are that they're focused on those concentrated development areas, the places I'm talking about. Our premise is that we would not, for instance, suggest a tree management bylaw to cover all of Landsville, but maybe we would for the intensive development areas, not to worry about every individual tree, but to make sure that they aren't mass clear cut and sit there for 10 years eroding and being ugly between phases of development. We'd also look at more intensive stormwater guidelines, water conservation standards, greenhouse gas, climate mitigation standards, and alternative transportation, again, focused on the development areas. And with the caveat being we're not intending to regulate heavily the rural areas or the non-developed areas of Landsville. That caught the highest support of anything. You can see the 80%. With comments to, again, not over-regulate outside the development areas. We looked at the waterfront. Issues there in the long run are sea level rise, but there's erosion now. There is riprap that's been going in to protect property, and we understand that. There are some seawalls, both old and new. We talked about potentially alternatives, including green shores or beach nourishment, and brought that forward with the idea to discourage seawalls, which tend to lead to erosion. Just usually you get one seawall that erodes a neighbor, and they have to build something, and it goes on down the beach. Again, extraordinarily high support. With some comments from landowners saying there is a place for riprap, and we agree. Others saying there's a place for seawalls. We're not sure about that one. Secondary dwellings, we asked the question throughout the district as to people's support for secondary dwellings, and it's worth looking at the detailed neighborhood results because it may vary by neighborhood. Generally strong support with repeated caveat as long as it's regulated and depending on how it's implemented. In other words, parking issues could occur or appearance issues, those need to be carefully regulated before it goes ahead. The second section, so what I've given you was very detailed. The second section was trying to respond to comments from our steering committee about, well, what's the cumulative impact of all this? What happens to our total population? How do we compare big picture options of either keeping the 2005 OCP and not encouraging further water connections was scenario A. Scenario B was allowing water connections, but essentially keeping the land use from the 2005 OCP as is, which would mean a lower population, although we're above the 5,000 mark because of foothills in any of these. Scenario C was basically compiling the trial balloons, if you like, that we put out and said, what would that do in terms of population? And it was close to 8,000. And so we were asking people to step back and say, given everything they've looked at so far, be aware of what this does cumulatively and what do you think? And you can see that I think that the cumulative impact, gives people some pause. It's big changes in numbers from 3,000 to 8,000. And so there was 27%, around a quarter that said let's just leave it alone. 18% status quo, that is, let's not grow. B, let's allow water connections but grow with relatively low density, like half acre, some third acre, but the mix being in the village core. And then C being more of the things that we've presented. And you can see that there's a range of opinion out there. I don't want to downplay you can see the differences in the numbers, the slightly softer numbers here than in the other responses. So I read that to mean people are interested in development. They don't want to do nothing. They're interested in high quality. They're interested in growth, but not too much. And there's going to be a lot of variation in opinion on that. Moving to water, equal, although it's feels like it gets shorter shrift. I mean, equal reason for the survey was trying to get a sense of where people are at in terms of water issues, water quality and water quantity limitations, and how they felt about the need for community water extensions. As we go ahead, we will be comparing the results in land use scenarios and those directions with what new information is coming about water supply and looking at how those two marry up. So we are turning our attention more now, again, to the water master plan. We looked at, this is a provocative question, we actually asked people, do you think those who would get community water, new community water, whether they're existing properties or development, should they pay 100% of the costs, or would other landfill taxpayers subsidize them? And we fully expected everyone to say no, the people that get water pay all the costs. But this does indicate some softness from landfill taxpayers to subsidize. However, when you look at the neighborhood breakdown, you can see that it is those that don't have community water that think it should be subsidized, and those that do that aren't quite so interested. So, as far as respondents of the survey overall, 60% are on community water and 41% are on private wells. And of those private wells, 14% were outside the water service area. But that's a reasonable window on the situation in Lanceville. Here is where respondents came from. And I think, generally the distribution is good, with Clark Drive a little bit underrepresented and Bayview a little underrepresented. You can see the Fernmar Road area and the Atz Road area, they're tiny, as in like 5 properties, 8 properties. And we do think in both those cases there's a need for probably staff direct contact with the owners, that sort of thing. It's too small a sample to really make decisions on. We've asked this every time we've gone out to the public. We're really trying to convince them to share with us how their water quality is. This is the best results we're going to get, and I wish we had more, but it's showing, actually, somewhat to our surprise, that whereas most people have had their water tested, over 3/4 it's acceptable in terms of water quality. There's around 20% where it is not potable or not aesthetic, which honestly is a little lower than we expected. Certainly to those people in the 20% category, I mean, it's a grave concern. When you look at quantity, do I have enough water? Do I run out? We asked people, do they have enough in general, or is it only enough for indoor, meaning they run out for outdoor, or not for either indoor or outdoor? And again, this is a little bit higher, so it appears that there are issues of quantity in greater numbers than there are of quality. What was interesting is that over 3/4 are very interested in fire protection. They see the benefit in that. And of course, each of these, I won't go into them by neighborhood, but they are, the way the survey is designed, then we are able to drill down to differences among neighborhoods. And I'm just going to hit the high points of that. For most of them, we asked 3 options. This is Clark Drive area as an example. Option A was, I don't want water extension. I don't think it's justified. Option B was, it showed a range of payment over 20 years, this much each year for 20 years, if you were to fund the community water extension without new development. And then option C said, well, what if we were to wait for new development as was anticipated in the land use options, which reduces the cost per parcel over 20 years. Which of those do you prefer? And so I'll touch on each of them, but in Clark Drive, there is 70% support for community water extension. About half of them would prefer it in the absence of new development. So there's strong interest in Clark Drive and getting on with it. In the Owen Road area, about 54% support eventual water extension, but most prefer to wait for development to bring it close. They're not in a panic. Of course, this will vary by individual, but when we bring them together. Fermar Road area I mentioned was, there's 8 lots, there were 5 participants. It's not bad in percentage, but that's such a small sample, we encourage further input. Those that responded want water. And development's not really an issue there. It doesn't make a difference to their cost, whether there's development or not. Atz Roads area, really there was only 1 response, and there's 5 properties. If there's one in particular, we'd say, go and talk to them. That's not representative necessarily, and the costs are relatively high. The Winds, one of the larger areas, there was just over 3/4 support for community water extension. A close split between wait for development or proceed without it. So certainly strong interest in water, but I think generally when you look at the comments, the Winds area is worried about amount of development adjacent to them. I think there's a lot of people that like development. They're worried about the extent of it because there are large properties and it's a large number of units, and that is an issue still in the Winds. We did split out the Winds 0.3 acre lots from the Winds Estate area, because the Winds Estate area in the old OCP is not in the sewer extension area, and we wondered if there's a different attitude between the two, and there is. The Winds Estate area, just over half don't support water line extension. No, almost half do, so it's not that there's no interest, but it's certainly less there than it is in the Winds more dense area. That's the Winds Estate area. The Bayview area, out towards the Neuse, very expensive to service because of just the distance, and people there generally were, the great majority, 78%, were saying not water to my neighborhood, at least at this time. Now, having said that, there is not a lot of participants either, but it is an indication of, I guess, priorities at the time. We did ask as well, sort of a price sensitivity question. We said, if all of the costs were based on no grants, no landfill assist, and only developer assist. So if there was, say, a grant, what's your price comfort? And of course it varies by individual, but when I look at the numbers here, certainly there's a bulge around the $500 to $1,000 a year mark, somewhere in there. People are going, yeah, that seems comfortable. So I think if that was the cost, the amount of interest would go up. That's what that means. So that's very much the high points. As you know, we've dropped on council a document that's a couple hundred pages long, which is highly detailed. Most of what I've said is in there and a lot more. There is all the charts and graphs. There are summaries of comments. What we did was look for comments that were repeated several times, and we tried to summarize those. There are a lot of other comments that are one-offs that we didn't summarize. but we have included all of the verbatim responses, so we encourage council to look at them all. We so much appreciate the effort of the community in doing this. It's a lot of effort from them. There also is, from Discovery Research, our pollster, the breakdown by neighborhood of the key empirical questions, which is interesting reading. We expect that as you review the comments, there may be other questions. We do think we're extraordinarily pleased with public response to the survey and think that it's a strong indication of minority and majority opinion. It's the best indication we're going to get of that. It's interesting that it is generally consistent with what we heard at the most community events. Some kitchen tables might have had a different tack. When we look at what we got in the first survey and the online survey and the public events, it's a consistent message, which is actually consistently more open to change than I'd expected at the beginning. I think it would have been as easy for respondents to say no as it is to say yes to most of the questions that were asked. And so it is an interesting result. In saying it tells us where the majority is at, it doesn't mean that I expect to ignore the minority. There's a lot in the comments that are nuances and subtleties, and I think as we go ahead, we'll be considering carefully how we can find a solution that is in the broadest interest of the community, knowing that we aren't going to please everyone either. Our next steps then are to start to go back to the old OCP, think about how we might change it, bring that back to the public and council and our OCP advisory committee, and we'll be at the same time thinking about the practicalities of how we might implement this. What techniques might we use to bring it to pass? So I'll stop there, Your Worship, and open it to your direction.
Thank you very much for that summation. Turn it over to council. Questions, comments? Councillor Hayman.
I've got lots.
Sure.
I had the time to go through this.
No, that's good.
So I just got a few. I'll start with a few and then give other people an opportunity. I have to agree that the general consensus in this document is that the majority of the community wants to see the community stay semi-rural. They like it the way it is. The comments in detail go on about no, no, no. So definitely there's a real sense that people love their community and they like the fact that it's semi-rural and it's very natural and they like the larger lots. So I thought that was quite good. And a lot of the questions even emphasize that. Basically in the document it says the goal, or it appears to be the results of the survey, are maintaining a semi-rural character with lot sizes that would vary between 0.25 and 0.33 per acre. So right at the very beginning under question 5 you make that statement, which is consistent with the current OCP. So I think that's what people probably are looking for. So I agree with that. A couple of things I am going to disagree with you on. On page 6, I do appreciate the tables. They were very informative. The WINs actually 54% do not support the development up there. They don't support the G. And 61% of the Owen Road people don't support the Ryland property. So I found that very interesting.
Point of order.
Councillor Gesworth.
Point of order, is there a question?
Yeah, there is. I'm getting to it.
Well, there's time for question and comments in relation to that.
Thank you.
If I could bother your counselor, just give me the page again. Just
Page
so I'm
6. If you go to page...
No, you're in this document?
Page 6 of which document?
I'm in the tables, the yellow.
Oh,
You actually go to the detailed
Oh,
responses
the
by
Discovery
neighborhood?
Research
by neighborhood.
Okay,
information.
Yeah.
thanks.
So by those neighborhoods, and they're the people who are most impacted by these developments, they obviously aren't supporting this level of density. So,
That is the reason we present it in all forms, including by neighborhood, is for council's benefit. Yeah, you will have to balance the immediate neighborhood and the broader community, and both are relevant.
oh, absolutely. And I get that. I'm just saying right now, I see reading this, that those areas don't support the developments and they really don't support community water to the extent that's being presented. If you read it, a lot of them have said they support the status quo or no significant development to get to water. So if they're already saying that, then to me the question would be, what implication does that have if we ever go to a local service area referendum? They're gonna vote no, because they're already saying no.
That's one of the reasons I say we'll be looking at this all the way through. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of question we'll come back to again and again.
Yeah.
Study it.
Yeah, so a question I have though is, we've made a leap in here that we're gonna create comprehensive development planning areas, yet throughout the document, all it refers to is comprehensive planning, which to me doesn't mean a comprehensive development area. It just means we're gonna have, the way I take it, and I'm not a planner, is that it's just, we're gonna engage the community more in the planning decisions for that area. I don't see how we jump to creating CD areas. How did we do that?
I think it is very much still on the table as to how. When you look at the survey questions, and it came from our pollster, who said, what's a comprehensive development area? It just refers to development areas. And so whether the implementation mechanism is, well, of course involves zoning, they would all have to be rezoned. The OCP does not rezone anything. There's decisions case by case to come. Whether the implementation mechanism is just a land use designation or a land use designation mixed with a density bonus, which is what's in the existing OCP, or more comprehensive development areas like the village area, which is in the existing OCP, very much is our next step, and working with the community and council and committee to consider that. So it's we're not at all fixed on how we implement this. So the term comprehensive development came out to be one that is commonly used for a development area that is slated for development but has some flexibility in terms of the mix of development. So it's very common if you want not just one land use type but a mix of them to use that technique. But whether that's appropriate for Lanceville or not is premature. More to come.
I have more, but do you want me to wait?
Sure. Other comments, questions? Councillor Coulson.
So this is good. There's a lot of good data in there. How do we capture the desired growth rate? Sorry. That was asked in the first survey. 67% of people wanted 1% or less. So with this survey, we've got good information on, the form, what people are looking for. There's some data on gross density. What we're missing is how fast they want to get there. So you could magically have it all plop down in a year and grossly blow out of the water the desired growth rate people expressed. So I'm curious how we're going to bring that into the fold.
It's an astute question, because it is the rate of growth is one that an official community plan typically doesn't address because it is so variable. So absolutely, the community is interested in a moderate pace of growth, slow to moderate. That's what we've heard. They are interested in changing. It varies by individual, but I think the community will be more comfortable with the moderate rate of growth. In starting to consider how to deliver, that is a conundrum, because an OCP is written in a way that tries to provide direction, but can't anticipate what markets do. The market could be dead for a decade, or it could be hot as nails. It's going to be highly variable. So we are starting to think about other mechanisms, like development service agreements or other things that would deal with that pacing issue. So it's very much in our mind. How much of that is in an OCP and how much is in maybe a water master plan or other document is something that we're starting to think about. Don't have the answers yet, but we certainly understand the concern.
Okay, thanks. Because to me, it can also impact the question being asked. So, we draft up an OCP that captures all this. There's all these areas that can do this based on the OCP. Hot market, it all happens at once potentially. And I know there's realistic things that govern the rate, but you can completely blow out the growth rate. And so in that case, you have to phrase the question. If you're only allowed to put, it's like Monopoly, if you're only allowed to put 4 houses on the board at a turn, where are you gonna put them?
One of the conundrums that's added to that is interest, for instance, in Clark Drive, or those in the wings that want water and would like the cost to be reduced, and would perhaps like development to help with that. It's not everybody, but there are some that have that view. You know, that then implies that, well, development needs to start in some measure anyway, enough to put those services in the ground, which pushes one to say, well, you need development here and there, as well as the village. Whereas in a perfect world, I think the community would say, do the village first. But that leaves people with high costs of water or no water. And that is a big picture conundrum.
Sorry, it's along that thread. Have to spend more time on it, but when I look through the water results, when you looked at the statistics for what people were willing to pay for water, when you look at the cost of water under scenario C, I think it was, where there was development support, there was, I think, only one area where the resulting cost was within the amount they were willing to bear.
I can take a look, take a closer look, I think.
No, I think what it was is those people that picked option A, if you're referring to the $1,000 reference in that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was in relation to the breakdown of option A, which was they didn't want the extension of water, but if the price was lower, would they accept it?
Correct.
So it was only a subset of the overall population.
That's right, yeah. They are subtle questions. They're trying to get an attitude from different directions to get a full picture. Thank you.
Yeah, but what I'm ultimately trying to allude to is we have to change our perspective on water, because for so long it's been we need development to pay for water because people want it. If the economic data or just the general expression of interest data shows that they don't really want it, we might have to change why we're pursuing development and what we're doing with the development dollars.
Certainly that is one of the key questions, and that's why the survey tried to give people the approximate effect on the approximate cost over 20 years of with or without development, because that, you know, the two are related, right? You may rather not have development, but you want a lower cost. As an individual, you need to make a choice which of those on balance is right, and then counsel for the whole community. And that's a balanced and nuanced decision. So the survey is trying to give, you know, the best data we can on that, and to, in a way that's as scientific as we can, so that it's there before council and you can see it as something that can be trusted as representative, I think, and beyond that, it's a political decision and a priority decision. But we do think these are representative of what the various neighborhoods are thinking about that. So it gives you a sense of where the majority is and where the minority is, and that was data we didn't have before. It's important.
Okay. I'll stop there. I got more, but
Councillor Swain?
Yes, through the chair, to our consultant, just a couple quick questions for you. For the survey response rate of 37%, is that a good result?
It is, and we've asked our pollster for the usual, you know, it's this accurate 19 times out of 20. I haven't got that number yet, but we will have that. It's necessary, and so, but before having that, it's a very respectable result.
Sure. And
Better than they expected.
A couple other quick questions for you. So the water estimates, was a Class D estimate used or plus 40% costing used for the water estimates?
It's Class D, and they're presented as a range. So the quantities are taken off by Coors and Associates, and then they apply a range of unit costs and call them a Class D. That is a plus or minus 30% is what they suggested is the accuracy.
And my last one is just with respect to, you made a comment, I think, about the attitudes of the community and development and so on, and mentioning about the winds and, you know, being that they're concerned with having development in that area, so in reference to probably the G property and for the development. And I'm just wondering, you know, personally, like, what do you think may have actually contributed towards this negative attitude towards the G property?
Well, I don't want to imply that it's a 100% negative attitude. I'm implying that it is a neighborhood discussion. It's clear from the results there's a neighborhood discussion. There's not. That's the one area where I think there's less clear consensus in the neighborhood about what they want. So I'm stepping beyond facts now in interpretation, which is what you're asking me to do. I think that most people expect that the G property would develop at some point in time. It's a large property and it is zoned for development. The discussion is about at what density, and so we've been asking questions about what are the kinds of land uses that you would like for landfill. I think what generates the largest shock is just pure numbers. It's a very large property, therefore the numbers of units, no matter what you do, are relatively large. They're a significant proportion of landfill's development area, and I think it's just those numbers that people just react to. So that doesn't change the fact that there is, I think, a wide range of opinion in the WINS area that this survey indicates. There's definitely people there that are pro-development, but where's the majority? Thank you.
Councillor Henry?
Thank you. Just to follow up, so just a few other observations I've got. I saw also that Owen Road area 52%, Landsville West area 52% don't support the Landsville Care precinct up at the top. What's interesting, according to the table, is that actually 76% of all of the community is more supportive of the care facility down here in the village. And I took just my calculations, and I like stats. I took out the village core, because if you take the village core out of this plan and actually do the calculations, you get a totally different result of what people are looking for in this community. Once you pull the core out of here, and you see in the comments, a lot of people say, do the core first, do the core first. If you take that out, you see a totally different perspective of your 56% or 76% in support of this development. So I think that's something we should consider doing, is pulling the village out of here to get a true sense of how people feel about their community at large. Because it appears to me that it's skewing the numbers quite a bit, especially when you look at what areas have the higher percentages of supporting that. So
I think it's fair and important to look at both the cumulative numbers and the neighborhood numbers. So
yep.
I agree with you. They both indicate a general attitude and area-specific ones, yes.
Just another observation on secondary suites. Generally, if you actually again look at the numbers by area, the more dense areas are not so enamored with suites.
I noticed to my surprise, the village, for instance, said not so enamored with it.
And Whitman Chelsea said no way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that's important for us to consider as we go forward, right? What does that mean?
Well, what does that mean? Are they worried about the intense density in those areas versus a half acre having a suite?
Yeah, perhaps.
So to me, it says there needs to be a lot more work done on secondary suites before we make any decisions.
And I think that's a general fair comment. And as I said, we'll be going back to this again and again because there's that kind of information in here that's useful.
Yeah. Do you want to keep going, or do I have a few more?
Well,
Just a couple.
if you only had a couple more.
Okay. I found it also interesting that only 77% of those on the water system are willing to pay up to $250 per year or less. Speaks volumes to how much they're willing to pay for water. I also like the fact that 65% of residents are getting their well tested.
Yes.
Tells me they know where they're on top of their water quality, quantity, all of that. So they're definitely. On the fire protection, I think we need to ask another question there. How much are they willing to pay for it?
Well, we have been.
Yeah, because right now, if you said to me, do you want $1 million, I'd say absolutely. You know?
Yeah.
So those are just some good things. My biggest concern is there's some inconsistencies in the principles being applied. Okay, and I'll give you a couple of examples of how that's the case for me. For example, on page 33, we talk about water and who wants it.
Again, just checking again on the document.
Yeah.
Which document are you in?
I'm in
The yellow table?
No, I was in the regular document when you get into water.
Okay.
And you got the green bars.
Yes.
The report is making the assumption that the people who want the B and C are of the same mind, where I disagree. Like, you know, that's a conversation for the public. But if people say they believe in extend existing parcels, but no significant new development, to me that means they want water, but they don't want it at the expense of losing their neighborhood. So I think we need to look at adding B and A together, which then gives you a totally different perspective on who wants water. In the case of the WINS, again, 59% say they don't. If you go in the case of the Owen, 61% say they don't. And you kind of have to take that approach because on page 34, that's the argument you use for saying that the people on the Wings Estate don't. It's basically because they said in those categories they didn't want water, so if it applies in that case, it must apply in this case.
I think it can be interpreted either way, but the raising the question is fair.
Yeah, well, if they don't want significant development to me.
I'm not saying I agree with your interpretation, but I'm saying raising the question is fair.
Yeah. And then the other issue was, based on significant, another inconsistency I found was in the survey presentation on the questions. On page 10, we speak about option B, scenario B, for our reasoning for new connections. But then when you go to the next page, it now becomes option B and is totally changed as to what that option scenario B means. So for example, in one case, we say that under scenario B, new connections are allowed funded by existing residents. But when you go into getting into the meat of the water, it says, no, we're not allowing any significant new connections under this scenario.
Scenario B?
Yeah, you switch the terminology in there.
Yeah, that's why, right, there is no parallel between the land use option B and the water scenario B. They're two entirely different.
But people took them as sort of the same. A lot of, at least I was thinking.
No, I don't think so.
So,
No.
Anyway.
We didn't get, I would need to look more, but I'm trying to think of a comment I've seen that raised that issue, and I did not see that.
Okay. And then just one question on the costing. Did you include the cost of the city of Nanaimo buy-in and the pricing and the cost to connect to the house?
The survey tries to make it really, really clear that the price that's put out is the cost of the extension of pipe, of community pipe to the property line of the home. The connection on the parcel is not included because that'll be different for every parcel. There's a distance and rock and other things. And the Nanaimo cost is not included. They're both additional.
Okay.
And we've been consistent with that in any communication. They are additional.
On page 12 of the questionnaire, up at the top, second line, it does say in brackets, cost exclude one-time water supply connection fees or on-parcel piping development.
And just for Fernmar area,
Yeah.
why is there not an option C?
Because
There's a development right across the road.
Oh, parcel.
Yeah, that wants to develop.
in that area,
Yeah.
yeah, there is, but that doesn't make a difference to the, you're correct, that if that other half of Fernmar were to develop, the number of units that would be paying would be increased, right? And so the cost per unit would go down. How many units would that be? We can't say.
Double. No,
Or more.
I mean, if you
Or
double,
more.
or more,
Yeah,
yeah,
or
but even
more.
if you double it, then it halves the extension
Yes.
cost.
And so there isn't a development that's bringing the pipe closer to Fernmar. The difference would be within Fernmar. So you are correct that if there were development within that, it would reduce the cost. The same would apply as if there were somehow subdivision in the Winds or Winchelsea, it would reduce the cost of the remaining units. We chose not to try and calculate that because it's a total unknown. It depends on a whole lot of zoning decisions and other things that are unknown. So yes, if there were more units that appeared, it would reduce the cost per parcel and maybe pay it off sooner.
So
We tried to be, if you like, realistic, but not overly optimistic.
Right. So one of the comments I made, and I'm not sure if it's in the comments, is how do our wells factor into all of this? Right now, we've been told our wells are going to produce more water than we had anticipated, so there is another option for water now.
And so, as I mentioned, getting back to the water master plan is our next priority.
Okay.
There are several questions around that, but one is, with different types of land use, what might be the design volume for each land use? You know, if there was a small lot house, how much water would that need as opposed to a half-acre lot? There's actually quite different numbers. Condo in particular, quite different numbers. So we're trying to look at that. We'll then look at the new data on what the supply might be, and then correlate how those relate. You know, where are there limitations in the system? That very much is the next priority, and I know there'll be curiosity around that too. Coors are working on that now. And
So through the step, when will we get that water report? We're gonna get it in March.
It's, oh, sorry, I'll let Steph answer.
Through the chair, we're actually working on it now. We're just about to a point where we have all the information from the hydrologist. But there's a few more things that we have to get. And then once we have that, hopefully within the next month, we'll have that report.
Because you can't really finish this until we have that piece of the puzzle.
Good, that is correct. True, your worship, yes, that's correct.
Any other questions or comments from individual councillors? Councillor Colclough.
Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation, very well done, and thanks to your staff and the steering committee and our staff. Also, certainly want to commend the public. I know 37% is a huge response, particularly when it's such a comprehensive survey. It's much, you might get a higher rate if it's 2 pages, but typically you don't get 37% even with 2 pages. So I think it shows the community's interest and the commitment and the time that they've spent. I really appreciate that. I agree with your presentation and the comments in your presentation. The results of the survey, in my mind, reflect what the public has indicated at workshops, a few workshops, and at most of the Kishinev meetings, certainly most of the people that I talked to. So I'm encouraged by that. And I don't agree with Councillor Ames' conclusion that the majority don't want things to change. That certainly isn't what I hear or see. With respect to comprehensive development zones, I think that is one way to address the concerns that people have if they're in favor of a certain scenario, but they have some reservations around it. Through a comprehensive development zone, that allows the district then to negotiate with the developer to address those in a lot more detail than you would if you had just straight zoning that if you meet these requirements, you can do it. So I think there definitely is a place for comprehensive development zones. Concerns that I have are still around people's interpretation of what a half-acre lot is. Really, a landfill is only one subdivision of half-acre lots, and that's North and South. And a lot of people think that Peterson and Winchelsea are half-acre lots, and they're 1/3 and 1/4. I've talked to a lot of people about this area around here. The majority of these lots down here are actually around 0.15. And there's a few that are even smaller. So I think we have to keep that in mind. Same thing around seniors. We talk about seniors, and people talk about seniors housing in general terms, and that might mean, a empty nester house, which just happens to be smaller on a smaller lot so that they can travel and have less yard work to do, whereas the next person you're talking to, they're thinking about full-time, full-on care. So I think that really has to come into play when you're looking at seniors housing, in quotation marks, in the village. And, full-on care, seniors care facility, in my mind, does not need to be in the village, because most of those people don't get out and walk very far. In fact, the majority of the time they'll go out in a group in a van. And I think if you're looking for vibrancy in the village, what you're looking at is active seniors, and that's the sort of housing. So what the active seniors want, and the ones that want some care, that's what we should be targeting in the village. The other concern I have is talk about servicing half-acre lots. And as somebody with an engineering and public works background, that does not make sense. And I think that'll become really clear when our asset management plan is done and we start looking at having to replace sewer and water lines down the road and finding out that the per house cost to do that on a half-acre lot is tremendously higher than most people are willing to pay. So if we're talking about half-acre lots, we should be talking about maximum lot frontages so that we do get a reasonable number of houses per meter or per length of sewer and water line. So it is a big concern. I think it's inappropriate to be planning on fully servicing your typical half-acre lot.
Councillor Gisler.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Reid, page 2. I want to go to
which page 2?
Of the page 2 of the very first part of here. Yes, thank you. I didn't quite understand this graph. For example, Clark Drive area, 10% the blue line and 11% the green line. Is The blue line, that's the amount of land in the Clark area drive as opposed to all of Lanceville?
The blue line is, the blue bars are the number, the percentage of survey participants that resided in that neighborhood, and the green bar is the percentage of properties within that neighborhood.
I still don't understand. I understand the survey, 11%, 10% of the people in that area filled out a survey. What's the green line?
It's the
The green
percentage of
bar.
properties throughout the district that they make up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
So by example, Clark Drive area would have 11% of the properties in the district.
In the whole district?
Yeah,
Okay.
and they were 10% of the survey respondents.
All right. One last question. I notice, believe it's Lanceville West, we're talking about farm clusters. Is it Lanceville West? The
No, it
Village
was-
Core West.
It was, off of Peterson was one area, and the other area shown on the plan is towards Woodrow and the Island Highway.
Why just those areas? For example, Fernmar, rural, wouldn't farm clusters perhaps be ideal up there, or something to be considered up there?
Fair question. We showed those two as examples to get a sense of public interest, and haven't been religious about whether there's others. There might be others.
All right, thank you.
Further councillor comments? Councillor Coulson?
So I'm going to build off of the Fernmar discussion a few minutes ago. So procedurally, it's something that troubled me through this. So it seemed that there were chosen parcels that appeared as examples in this survey and plan. You had made the comment that it was mostly infill, the logical extension of services, so that helped fill some of the void for me. But like in the case of Fernmar, I know the gentleman that owns the golf course was interested in testing the waters, if something different would be permitted for him.
Yeah.
I don't know if he even had the opportunity to submit that to yourself, the committee. How did it die?
It's not dead. There are submissions from various quarters that are our next stage. So it's only in dealing with big issues, and the big issues seem to be the relationship between water and development, which is why these parcels are a focus that are in the questionnaire. There are smaller considerations, and the golf course is one. There's a few others I know of that are, people have come forward, and so those aren't forgotten, but they are detailed. We chose somewhat against the, our pollster was telling us all the way along, this survey is demanding. Not difficult, but it's, long. And so they were pushing us to keep it shorter. So things that are more detailed like that are not forgotten. There wasn't room for them in the survey, and they will come up now. They'll be a part of what we consider going forward with you.
So through council then, because I'm curious on how how do you get feedback on what's accepted or not?
Through council or the OCP committee?
Both. In other words, they'll be a part of the process going on.
Okay.
There's questions of density bonus, for instance. There's density bonus language in the existing OCP. I find it vague. We'll be looking at that and how that might be improved. Mm-hmm. So along with development permits and other languages, design guidelines, there's a lot of detail yet to come. The survey is trying to focus on the larger, more difficult questions. It's not the entire scope of the OCP changes.
Right. Because the other procedural one I've been concerned of is, let's take Ryland for example. Yeah, a good scenario was presented, it got support. What if you took kind of an inverted model of that and presented nothing? We want to leave it as is, current zoning, no development. Did we get the level of detail or even ask that level of question to the residents to compare truly what their interest is in these?
The easy
plans?
answer to that is to have it be developed under the existing OCP. The answer is no. I don't support the change.
Sorry, what was it?
Is no. It's as easy to say no support, as it is to say yes, I support it. If you wanted the existing OCP, you would say no, I don't support that idea. Some people did.
Okay. So that leads me to, this one will be a bit controversial. So with regard to the cumulative impact question that led up to that scenario A, B, and C table on page 24, I'm concerned that the current OCP has been misrepresented. You know, we had scenario A, which was basically nothing because water amenities limiting progress. Scenario B was the current OCP, and scenario C was what's been presented in the survey. There's some things that are just not true. Trees, I'll pick on trees because that's one that's near and dear to everyone. Scenario B, in private hands. That's not true. The OCP is littered with references to how trees will be preserved and cared for and stuff. I can send you my detailed list, but it's an example. And ultimately where I am concerned with is, if you present two scenarios and paint one of them in a distorted light, possibly is slightly less favorable and another one slightly more favorable, naturally you get skewed results.
Just a question for my information. The chart that's on that page 24,
Yep.
was that distributed to residents or otherwise?
Yeah, it's on page 10 of the survey, at the very back of the package we have.
Oh, there it is, sorry.
Yeah, it is,
I
yes.
looked through it and I couldn't find it initially.
Make sure we're
Okay.
If I could respond,
Yeah.
when you look at, I have the existing OCP here, when you look at development permit areas, which is what addresses existing trees, you can't see them too well from here, but there is a lot certainly in the foothills. There's basically 2 or 3 trees and a bit on the waterfront in the rest of Landsville, and the balance of it, the development areas, are in private hands. There is mention in the OCP, the existing OCP, of density bonus to hopefully protect trees, although it doesn't say how much. The problem with density bonus is if someone doesn't want to do the density bonus, they just proceed under the existing zoning. Our interpretation is, and when you look at the private hands that aren't in development permits, which is most of Landsville, you could cut down any tree today without a permit, and the only thing stopping it is people not doing it. It's in private hands. Development permit areas, no, it's regulated, but the rest is not.
Okay, well, I'll get into a debate about all these things, but ultimately my conclusion is wrong information was presented on the current OCP. And, I'll send you what I have, and we can discuss further, but it's a concern.
Okay, a number of council members have had cracks at a few things. I've just got some of the questions have been answered through the discussion, which is great. One of the challenges with so much information in a document is the interpretation. And depending on kind of what somebody's, in some cases, for example, a member of the public with a bias one way versus a bias the other way, they're going to pick and choose their pieces of information. So, some of my worries, for example, is when base amounts change. So, for example, on page 36, it was related to those people that picked option A. If you read back, those people that picked option A, then they secluded them and said, well, if the numbers were a little different, what would you be willing to pay? Mm-hmm. And there's statements like 3/4, 77% stated they'd be willing to pay $500 or more per year. The challenge for kind of a layman person looking at it is it's not 77% of the respondents, it's 77% of a narrowed down population. So it just kind of works out to 39%, basically, rather than 77%, depending on what you use as your base, as your population. And just in my quick kind of run through on a couple of things that I had the opportunity to do, picking some of those things out, like the one just above that, 49%, people say, oh, almost half sort of a thing. But it's actually 31 out of 117, so it's only 26%. So I worry about misinterpretations if somebody doesn't spend the time to kind of chew on it. And then kind of getting back to what Councillor Hain raised earlier about some of those costs, and I recognize the challenge of the costs of the individual property, distance to the house, for example. Also, in terms of a connection fee, recognizing we kind of have one, but it's going to change in that respect. When it comes to tying those percentages and the costs that are in here, when you start adding costs that aren't in here, the percentage that are willing to accept drops effectively, because their overall cost is increasing. So if these numbers were different, I'd suggest the percentage numbers are going to be different.
Your worship, I think that your forensics are good, and I think they're fair. I think that we are trying to present the data in as unfiltered a way as we can, and it's open data. Different people, different professions will make different interpretations, and that's to be expected. We are trying to be accurate, but not limit people's access to the data so that they can do that. So I'm open to comments like that, Mayor, and we'll try and respond to them. I guess all I can say is that it's certainly our intent never to be misleading.
Well, just as an example, and I'm not saying misleading, I'm just saying that different people are going to interpret it different ways.
They will.
On that same chart, which is the maximum annual budget one on page 36, down the bottom it says percentage of survey participants. And I don't believe that's all the survey participants that are encompassed in there.
Percentage of respondents, right?
Well, but no, even that, because there were some people that said, I'm not willing to spend a dime, but there's no option for that in that chart. So that chart does not include all respondents or participants. It includes a select part of that population.
Yeah, and yet the first sentence is the 64 survey participants who identified they would support, and so on and so on.
Yeah, but the bottom says survey participants, which somebody looking at it would say, okay, of all the survey participants, here's the distribution.
Yeah, it's certainly, it is a sophisticated survey, and one needs to read the whole thing carefully.
No, and I understand that. Last comment, just with regards to the, first off, I don't like words like significant development, because that, different things.
What does that mean?
But yeah. But if we were to take, for example, area HW-1 and HW-2, which is the winds and the winds, whatever it's called,
Estate.
the large estate.
The estate
Okay.
area, yeah.
For example, the area within the winds, they say with regards to it, a certain proportion is okay with development, but it's not going to be their direct neighborhood that's developed. The development area is in fact fronting on the estate area, the G property, right?
Partly, yes.
Well, almost completely
Across
Superior Road.
Yes, and so that, your worship, then that balancing between the wishes of the immediate neighbors and the broader community absolutely is.
And that's kind of my question is how do we, I mean, there's the community, there's the neighborhoods, there's the sub-neighborhoods. How do we take data like this and turn it into something that's more or less representative?
It is representative of the data. It is representative of the questions that were asked and the people that responded. I can't, specifics about what the neighbors across the road from the G property feel, of course, will come out at future events and public hearings, and there'll be a whole process around that, as there should be. And council has to deliberate on those and make a decision in the interest of the broader community. So I think the survey goes into as much detail as is reasonable and gives results that are helpful. Can it answer every question?
No. Okay. Other than that, just with regards, just a comment with regards to DP areas, we had a meeting with the News First Nations last week, and there was some concern expressed with regards to treatment of potential First Nation sites, things like that, and ways to potentially protect them, and whether or not there could be some consideration in the OCP for that sort of an aspect.
Archaeological inventory. It's a good
Correct.
idea. It's a good idea.
So in our discussion with the chief, I did mention to staff we talked about it and touch base with you. Okay, that's one final one.
Yeah, just my last comments. Just a quick follow-up with regards to comments by Councillor Colson and Councillor Holcroft with regards to information that's presented and a little bit how people interpret it. It would have been nice if people knew what the current density is in these areas. You know, currently, you know, basically we allow, is it 200, I had it in my hand.
Current density or existing
What's in
density?
the current OCP, the density, is quite a bit different than what this is proposing. Oh yeah, in the current OCP, it says 294 to 441 units. If people had a basis to compare this new density of 590 units to, I think it would have given them a little bit more insight, because we heard comments about what is a half acre, right? Where people can start putting some scope to that. So I think that's important information to get out. Just with regards to next steps, I just want to make a couple comments. I'm just curious, the OCP committee hasn't really seen this. We actually haven't even opened the OCP itself, the existing OCP yet. So are we going to get an opportunity to try and compare this document to our existing OCP to provide some feedback? So that's one question, and then just two other questions. Sitting on or being involved in an OCP process, I know there's a referral process to the News First Nations, and I heard they've got concerns about the G property now. They're not supportive of 300 units. How does that factor into this? And I've also wondered how the city of Nanaimo will get a referral about how they feel about their water now being used for development in Upper and Lower Landsville. So I think those are important components that we need to build into this plan too. So, you know, how do we address those? When do they get addressed?
Your worship, on the OCP committee, I know my staff person Jenna was at the last meeting and is tabling this at the same time. As I mentioned, the next step is to reopen the existing OCP and compare that to this and start to think about that and implementation mechanisms, and absolutely that will come back to the OCP committee at this next regular meeting.
So we get some time to work on this.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
The questions about referrals to First Nations and City of Nanaimo, the referrals process typically is once there is a draft that's, you know, through the council process here, then it is referred out. And that, well, the schedule for that at the moment is over the summer. It's a good thing to do over the summer because we don't really want to do public process, but we do want referrals. Mostly is to agencies.
So what if we're not done the OCP committee by the summer? Because we only got one more meeting. Like,
It's a process, and the process carries on. So where we end up is, I've laid out the process as we propose it, and we're proceeding that direction. You know, how it unfolds is something that staff and council will address as required.
Very last.
Sorry, just a follow-up to that.
Oh,
'cause-
sorry, hang on, Councillor Paulson, you okay?
No, fine.
Oh, it's just a follow-up to the process, because on the timeline that was presented, I think you said you'd have a draft OCP by June. So if there's only one more committee meeting, there isn't really much time to have the committee do much of real meaningful work unless we delay the draft OCP.
So I know there are some in the committee that would essentially like to write the OCP themselves. That's not the current process. We certainly value their input, and it's been very helpful to date and will continue to be. And so that, I think, is something that the committee is discussing as to how much involvement it wants and how much hands-on versus make comment. There's a variance of opinion there, I think, and that'll get worked out. As far as suggesting a delay in the process, I wouldn't. The reason is that the public is engaged. They've been very helpful. There's a timing which is helpful for the public, and there's a danger if there's too long a gap that you lose their interest and their support. The process is going just about right. I wouldn't slow it down if it's possible.
I'm confused, because it was supposed to be, was it 90% of people supported the current OCP with minor refinements? The OCP committee hasn't even opened the current OCP, so where are they getting input onto this? And what is their role now?
Through your worship, I'm not sure that's quite accurate.
Okay.
We started with a review of the OCP. This is an example of what happens. We started with a review of the OCP last fall with both the committee and the public. Well, I shouldn't say with the public, the committee was being formed. And so that's where we started, was looking at the existing OCP. We are, when we get into the details, I think that the great majority of the existing OCP, as the public has said, still is good and will stand. There are things that are in the survey that we're considering, and of course, in the end, it's council that will decide which directions you wish to go. But it's a bit of a, I don't think it's quite accurate to say that the existing OCP hasn't been opened.
Okay. Councillor Goldblatt. Councillor Goldblatt.
Thank you. Great discussion. I think it's also important to note that when you look at this document to date, other than potentially secondary suites, very little is going to change in the existing neighborhood. Is that correct?
Your worship, I mean, there is a huge amount of the existing OCP which would stand. When you get down to the details of the changes, there's a lot of things in here that are reinforcement, protection of trees, protection of water courses, the like, things like that that are reinforcements of the existing OCP. The changes to most existing neighborhoods we envision as, yes, very minor. It's in raw land that we're looking at change.
Well, and people, for example, in the Peterson Road area or in the Chelsea area, their neighborhoods aren't going to change, other than potentially
There's nothing in our proposals at the moment that would change. Sorry, Your worship. Thank you.
Sorry. Well, thank you very much for your time. I know you've been up there a long time, and we really appreciate
Thank you.
the clarification on it.
Okay.
Which gets us into bylaws, bylaw number 60.35 for consideration. It's regarding first reading of the Lanceville additional municipal zoning bylaw for amendment for 7143 Collette Road. Our community planner has put forth a report detailing the potential changes in relation to that property. Anything to add to the report, Mr. Lipshut?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think for the most part, I'm hoping that the report is fairly straightforward. Property owners, they're the owners of Bruce Plus Tourism. They're at a point in their organization where they need to expand. And they've approached staff about discussing expansion and what options are available to them. As noted in the report, the current zoning on the property is commercial 1. And certainly they are able to expand the commercial office component of the project. Having said that, the question we posed to the applicant was long-term, what are their goals with respect to the development of that site. And it was indicated to us that the long-term goal was to look at a mixed-use development of some sort. And through various discussions, the thought was that this would be an appropriate time to look at considering amending the zoning to allow for a future mixed-use development on the property. This allows the applicant to make decisions with respect to the new development of that site, the phasing of the project, and so forth. Certainly, we've had discussions about some of the infrastructure limitations, i.e. water, and how that plays into how they ultimately develop the site. The rezoning also provides security, should the rezoning be approved, it provides security for the applicants with respect to their long-term vision for the property, and so that helps them not only with their planning, but also securing financing and so forth moving forward. With respect to the question that was raised at the beginning of the meeting regarding upgrades, sidewalks in particular, the general answer to that is that any development application that comes before the municipality, the onus is on staff to ensure that that project meets the requirements of the municipality, the District of Lanceville. And so, in our development subdivision bylaw, we do outline standards with respect to improvements along the frontage of properties, and certainly we'll be having those kinds of discussions with the applicant should they decide to move forward with the project. I should also mention that in your package and in front of you, there are two general options with respect to what could take place with respect to the development of the site. And they're, at this point in time, their concept are in service. Should the rezoning go forward, the next stage for the property owners would be to apply for the development permit. And it's at that stage where we get into the detailed design, formal character, landscaping, parking, all that good stuff. And certainly to provide that level of information, there is an estimate cost that will be triggered at that point in time. So the point of this rezoning is to see whether or not there's enough time for council to amend the zoning to allow for the mixed use. And pending the outcome of the process, they can then make decisions as to their next steps with respect to preparing detailed plans.
Okay, Councillor Ginsberg.
I'd like to move bylaw number 60.35, the council gives first reading the District of Lansdale zoning bylaw number 60, 2005 amendment, brackets 7143 Colette Road, bylaw number 60.35, 217.
Seconded by Councillor Swain. Discussion. Councillor Ginsberg.
Yes, I'm in favor of this development. I have a very nice colored scheme here in front of me. I understand that the current business employs 30 people. Certainly hope that with this development, there might be some more people with jobs in Lansdale. I think it's a great first step in changing the face of downtown Lansdale from a dreary countenance to something with a little more life. And I think from what I see here of the plans, I'm excited about it. My only question is I see little yellow circles around the perimeter. And I'm wondering, are those beach umbrellas or are those going to be trees?
That's to depict, again, on a conceptual basis, landscaping around the project. Certainly when we get into the zone permit stage, we will have more detailed landscape plans.
Because, one who likes green spaces, why spend all that money on concrete when pea gravel and some nice leafy trees along there would probably just be dandy to help change the face of downtown Lansdale. But I'm not totally in favor of this.
Councillor Swain.
Through the chair, yes, speaking in favor of the motion or the bylaw, as it's sort of being presented on by Mr. Reid about those OCP survey results for the village area 1, and as the rationale for actually hearing that discussion before hearing this bylaw is that with the mixed use, we have 76% support, and then we have 17% support for refinement. So I think just based on the survey results alone, definitely speak in favor of this development. I think it's what people in Lansdale want. They want to have some revitalization. I think this could be the flagship of this revitalization.
Any further discussion? Sorry, Councillor Coulson.
Sorry, a couple questions to the staff. What's the current use classified as for this business?
The current zoning is commercial 1.
Yep.
The property is currently within the village commercial core.
Yep.
And certainly the proposed development, should they go to a mixed use, is consistent with the current OCP.
Sorry, maybe I've been clear, but in our zoning, we have permitted uses and then a bunch of categories.
That's correct.
Yeah, so what category does it apply to? There's convenience store, office, personal service use.
That's right. So under the current zoning, the commercial 1 zone, it allows for office use, it allows for personal service, it allows for restaurant. And under the proposed new zone, we've added retail store, personal service, recreation facility, i.e. possibly a gym, and convenience store, along with residential. So under the existing zoning, with respect to residential, it limits you to 1 unit, or residential unit, versus the proposed zoning would allow for more than 1 residential unit, provided it can meet all the other requirements with respect to parking, lot coverage, all that good stuff.
I'll try a third time. So they currently have a business that's a travel agency. So what permitted use do we consider it right now? And under the commercial 8 proposed zoning?
Yeah, it's an office use.
An office use. Because where I'm confused is under the commercial 8 zoning, it says 60 meters squared. That's only 645 square feet.
Right, and so what this would allow for is, given the size of the property, it allows them to expand beyond just providing for their their existing business and future expansion, they could also allow for additional commercial space for other offices as well.
Or other uses.
Or other uses.
Yeah, and I get that, but they're allowed 2 buildings on this property?
Bear in mind that what's before council are 2 conceptual plans, and it's not until we get into the detail of the design, which is at the development permit stage. It could be 1 building, it could be 2 buildings, it could be maybe 3 buildings. But again, there'll be parameters that they'll have to meet, i.e. parking is probably going to be the big one with respect to accommodating the required parking space for the amount of square footage that the ultimate goals of the site.
Are you concerned about the intensity of the use?
No, I'll try it a different way. So the 2 plans they have before us, I like them, I do, I'll get that up. But it's around, the first one's 11,800 square feet, which is just under 1,100 square meters. The other one is 9,682 square feet, which is 900 square meters. In the commercial 8 zoning, none of the permitted uses have that size. And so I'm wondering if is this the right zoning they want? So I get that they're allowed, an office, but it's only 60 square meters.
Yeah, but keep in mind that's a minimum.
That's correct.
That's the
Well,
minimum.
that's just the
size.
site area,
That's
not the
on
building
rocks,
size.
That's right.
Yes.
There we go,
Yeah.
thank you, okay. I got it now, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hain?
Yeah, just for clarification, so before the public hearing occurs, will we know what this site plan or what the site layout's gonna be, how many buildings are gonna be we're looking at, just so that the residents near there are gonna know what it is they're looking at?
At this point, the answer would be no. The only drawings would be the 2 conceptual plans that you see before you.
Oh. Weird.
Welcome to real life. You don't know what somebody's gonna build beside you on a residentially zoned lot.
Yeah, but you have setbacks and stuff.
Yeah, which are there within the zoning.
They are in the zoning, and in addition to that, we've added a provision for landscape screening along the property lines that are adjacent to residential to provide a landscape buffer for the neighbors.
Councillor Coppola?
Oh yeah, speaking in favor of the motion there, I like the concept as well. I like that it's current and we're out of the 70s and the 80s where you drove down the street and you saw the parking lot and the businesses were in the back. So this has got it flipped around the right way and yeah, I'm in favor of it.
Okay. Any further? Councillor Paulson?
Just a procedural one, so what's the difference between doing 2 readings of the bylaw tonight and having the public hearing versus the alternative one, which is where it went right to a public information meeting?
Public information meeting is different than a public hearing.
Okay, so, yeah, okay.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Geselbrecht?
I'd like to move the second reading to this same bylaw as set out in the agenda.
Okay, second by Councillor Swain. Discussion? Hearing none? Oh, sorry, Councillor Swain?
Through the chair to staff, with such a, I guess, we're to amend this, or I guess change the bylaw. Does this set a bit of a precedent for mixed residential applications coming forward in the future? Like, are we likely to see more coming to us? And if this does go through, we're going to be, again, setting a bit of a precedent here?
Well, I think the law and council's consideration of the fact that the proposal that's on the table is consistent with the current OCP, and certainly consistent with what we've been hearing through our OCP review process. So there's that. I mean, there's nothing to stop a property owner from making an application at any given time to rezone their property. That's their right as the property owner. Ultimately, it's up to council to decide whether or not it's appropriate use for the site.
And just to follow up to that, have we had other applications come forward in the past? Like, obviously I'm new to council, but so I just don't know if there's been other applications like this in the past.
The physio building, I believe is residential upstairs now. I believe, so I can't remember how many years ago that was, but it has in the past.
Certainly, I've been here for approximately a year and a half, and this is the first official rezoning application for the village court area that we've received.
Councillor Coulson?
Just a general question to council. Should we consider increasing the 60-meter radius notification area, given that this property is sort of at the outer edge of the core? I think in the past we've done like 120 meters, or I forget now, but there's been a couple occasions where we've expanded that radius, just to encompass more of the businesses perhaps.
Is that a motion?
I don't know if I can do that as an amendment to a second reading, or if it has to be a separate one.
Recommend that go with the third motion. The third motion is specifically about.
Oh, because it's just a procedural as opposed to the bylaw itself.
Exactly.
Okay. Did you understand that?
Yeah, just looking at the third motion there, so, yep.
Okay. Any further discussion on second reading? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Geselbrecht?
Move the council approves this same bylaw 60, 2005, amendment 7143 Colette Road, bylaw 60.35, 2017, to proceed to public hearing, and further, that council schedules a public hearing for June 12, 2017, at 7 p.m. at the district office here at 7192 Landsville Road.
Second by Councillor Swain. Discussion. Councillor Coulson.
So I'll put in that amendment that we increase the notification radius to, geez, I don't know, 120?
I'll second.
I'll flip a coin.
Second by Councillor Colclough, so discussion on the amendment. Hearing none, all those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Motion carried, so back to the original motion as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay. Gets us to bylaw number 145, adoption of District of Landsville property tax prepayment bylaw, plan bylaw.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Colclough, second by Councillor Geselbrecht. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. No correspondence, mayor and council verbal updates. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Nothing, thank you.
Councillor Coulson.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Colclough.
Yes, I attended the Battle of the Atlantic Service, Oceanside, which was the legions from Qualicum Beach, Bowser, Mount Benson, Nanaimo, Landsville, and Parksville branches, on behalf of Mayor Hain, who was unable to make it yesterday, and Leda Reef on behalf of Landsville, and it was a very, very interesting event. I learned a lot, and I'm pleased to be there.
Councillor Hain.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Swain.
Nothing to report.
Myself, nothing to report at this time, which gets us on to item 12B, and just, no, it's the next one. So the OCP Plan Review Select Committee meeting minutes, just for information. Any questions, comments? Councillor Coulson?
On page 83, under new business, item 1, it speaks to the community planner was asked to review and report back to the committee pertaining to the build-out numbers. Is there an ETA on when that'll come through the path?
At the last committee meeting, we did provide a summary document with respect to the build-outs in the various areas. And so it was discussed. Committee members took upon themselves to take a look at those numbers as well. And certainly the difference in the final population calculation related to the assumptions made with respect to, I'll give you an example, the number of people per family, where the committee member used 2.7, and in our analysis we used 2.5, and certainly we also used a scale. So for multifamily, for example, where the units are smaller, the average person per household would reduce it. So those are certain things that would affect the outcome. I guess the other thing too, other major factor is the assumption with respect to usable land for each of those areas. So, you can simply do a straight division in terms of average units versus the parcel, but what we looked at, we effectively added a filter, and that given our non-traceable lands, we know that there are wet areas, there are environmentally sensitive areas on certain parcels, and certainly those areas would not be involved. So if you take them out of the total buildable area, again, it reduces or affects the overall population count.
Any further comments, questions? Okay, so moving on to the next item. On the Parks and Recreation Commission, April the 20th, 2017 meeting minutes, just for information of council. Item 12, actually it's in our agenda, item 12C, but it's actually item 2 on page 2 of the minutes under Mindtown Day. It's actually incorrect in the minutes itself. There was a plan that was done in March of 2008 that planned for the period 2008 to 2017. And because that plan only went to 2017, the comment was made that the budget for Mindtown Day ends in 2017. It doesn't actually end. It's just that particular plan back in 2008 was only planned as far as 2017. So it's not a case that the budget for Mindtown Day will end in 2017. I believe those numbers are still in our existing budgets.
Absolutely.
Going forward in the 5-year plan. So that answers the public's question of earlier. Any other comments, questions in regards to the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to item 13A, parcel tax refunds on manufactured homes. Our Deputy Director of Financial Services, Ms. Sowerby, has prepared a report with regards to the parcel tax refund program, and we are looking for a motion from council requesting an order from the Ministry of Community, Sport and Cultural Development to permit the refund of those taxes and related penalties and interest.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Colclough, seconded by Councillor Hain. Discussion. Councillor Coulson.
Just an interest question. What if they say no? Can they say no?
Yes, we're asking permission. They can always say no. Staff?
That's correct.
Wait and see.
Then I guess it comes back to us if they say no.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Is Councillor Desabert back?
Went to chat with friends.
Oh, okay. Item 13B, homeowner grant refund program.
So moved.
Similar thing, moved by Councillor Colclough, second by Councillor Hain. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any introduction of late items? Hearing none, moving on to item number 16. Notice a motion by Councillor Coulson. And just for clarification, Councillor Coulson, is this a notice of motion or is this a motion to be made tonight?
To be made tonight.
Okay. Floor is yours.
I move that council request an update from staff regarding the status of the Ryland property subdivision application, with details in the update to include but not be limited to: 1. An estimated date of when public consultation would begin on the zoning change that will be required. 2. Information on water provision by the developer in accordance with water supply and connection policy number 3007-3. Number 3. An estimate on the community planner time spent on this development project to date. 4. An estimate on the zoning lift that Lantzville will receive. 5. An outline of the process to be in place for council, staff, and residents to discuss how the money from the zoning lift would be utilized. And if I can, I'm going to add a 6. And any other relevant information staff feels would be beneficial for all of council to know.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Second by Councillor Hain. Just for the information of council members, if they don't know, or the public who raised the question earlier, zoning lift.
So I'll explain my understanding of it. It might be off, but from 2 of our previous municipal lawyers, it was explained to me that a zoning lift is, you've got a property with a current zoning that equates to a certain market value. If you then give a zoning upgrade, there is an increase in market value. That difference between the revised market value and the current market value is the zoning lift. Depending on the town, city, area you are, the town gets a portion of that lift, I think they called it an amenity bonus, but there's very specific language that had to be used. But in Lanceville's case, a town like Lanceville, we would typically get about 20% of the zoning lift as an amenity bonus to be used for a variety of things. And I believe there is a very discrete list of projects that you can put that money toward. So that's what my definition of zoning lift is.
Okay. Anything further to say on the motion itself?
No.
Okay. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Hain?
I have no concerns with the motion. The conversation around the Ryland property is quite public out there now. We talk about it at the OCP meeting. We talk about it at various other meetings. It's a conversation that the residents are having. Question through to staff, has there been any progress in the file? Are they moving forward on the file?
Your worship, through the council, to date, there is no new information with respect to the detailed design of the project. The only information that we have is what was originally submitted as part of their rezoning application.
So just with regards to getting some information, I think from what I heard from the previous CAO, he spoke that this development was going to equate to like an $85 million development, is where he saw this going. So, you know, obviously any information we could get that would, the residents put some perspective on the scope and size of this development would be useful information during an OCP process. So I can't see why it would hurt to gather that information.
I got a couple of questions, just generally to staff, if we could. Recognizing the definition of zoning lift given by Councillor Coulson, my guess is that is something that only occurs in evidence by bylaws and or direct legislation that allows any organization to even consider that. I'm not aware of any such thing being in place for the District of Lanceville. Is staff aware?
Your worship, through the council, as far as I know, there isn't anything official in writing that I'm aware of.
Okay, so nothing bylaw-wise, legislatively, anything like that? Okay.
Your worship, as well as everything I've read to date, there's nothing that I've read.
Okay. So from my standpoint, one of the reasons why I wouldn't support the motion is item 4 and 5, in the absence of any sort of legislation in that, there is no lift, basically, as it exists right now, and therefore there's nothing to use, which would unfortunately take out number 5. Just with regards to questions on number 1, 2, and 3, based on Mr. Limshue's previous comments about the the process of the application, it's just sitting there. And moving it forward is, for the most part, at the applicant's discretion. So we can't determine a date for that.
That's exactly correct, Your worship.
Okay. With regards to question number 2, the water provision by the developer, could you comment on your read on the plan on where they were getting water from?
Well, I think it's a discussion that they're having with their consulting engineers, and it's part of the additional detail that we're waiting for.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be prudent for me to comment at this point in time because that may change.
Okay. Okay. And then just the last one with regards to planner time, I don't know, you probably don't have that at your fingertips.
No.
So kind of similar to a question that was provided, or information that was provided by email to council on the time spent with regards to the refunds. Would it just be possible informally for staff to get us that number if they're able to estimate it, as opposed to it being a direct motion from council?
Your worship, through the council, we can certainly try to do that. This particular application is a little bit complex in the fact that the applicant that made the zoning application is also representing the Ryland property, as well as some of the other larger properties in the area. And so when you look at servicing, they're looking at a comprehensive approach to servicing. And so certainly when we talk about development, we spend a bit of time on Ryland, we spend a bit of time on the G property, we spend, so it's it's not as clear cut as
Okay.
what we hope.
But an estimate? Okay. That's all I have to say with regards to the motion itself. Councillor Coulson?
So a question on what you said about 4 and 5. So we don't have anything in place for zoning lifts.
No, not to my knowledge.
That's remarkable. We had a very detailed presentation from Don Lidstone, who said very specifically Landsville should be getting 20% of zoning lifts. Vancouver gets 80%, was the example given. So we're giving these zoning upgrades to developers and not realizing the maximum potential Landsville could get from it.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on it? Councillor Swain?
Yes, through the chair to staff, just a question. When was the last time we did one of these requests or similar requests on, say, a mini developer, say a current resident of Landsville who's just wanting to subdivide their property? When does council actually get down to the nitty-gritty details on those applications?
Your worship, through the council, I do not recall if there's been a request for a smaller application.
So my follow-up to that then would be, why are we actually doing this, for this developer and why we're not doing it for all developers, big and small? Why are we singling out this one developer? It concerns me.
Councillor Colclough?
Speaking against the motion for a number of reasons, most of which have been put forward by Mayor Haim. I just think that there's due process that's underway. It'll happen at the rate of pace, depending on when the applicant comes forward with adequate information. And I think that some of the aspects of this application or the process of this application that we're talking about is not council's business, it's staff's business. And when they get to the point where they have something to present to council, we'll see it.
Councillor Haim and Councillor Geselbrecht.
Well, I support the motion, and we have actually asked for information on an individual basis. We did it on the Marston property. We wanted a lot more detail on what was happening on that development, because there were a number of concerns raised down there, so it has happened before. We've actually asked for detail on properties that have been developing on the waterfront, because there were concerns about height restrictions and overheight issues. So this isn't the first time, it has happened before. So there's nothing wrong with this. To be quite honest, it's just additional information. We can actually read the reporter's report in the newspaper. He provides a lot of detail about where the water's coming from. It's already out there.
Councillor Haim, please speak to the motion.
So my point is it's just additional information that's already readily available to some extent. It was just an update, so I really didn't see what the issue was.
Councillor Geselbrecht.
Yes, through the chair to staff, my understanding is that we are prohibited by statute, the Community Charter, perhaps the Local Government Act, of providing any of this information while there's an application before staff, as opposed to the other applications that Councillor Haim was referring to, where those people had come to council for either variation or there was a problem. So my question to staff is that the case, that we're prohibited by statute from even dealing with this?
Indicative of the meeting. I believe that, the planner may want to comment on this also, but there's a number of issues at play here. Council's previously been advised that under the community charter, there's an actual prohibition for people influencing staff or putting pressure on staff in performing their duties. And the particularly sensitive issue is a subdivision application. The approving officer is an independent person. There's no opportunity for council to participate in the subdivision process other than establishing their standards in advance of application. And when an application is in process, there's no opportunity. Where it does get a bit confusing on this one is as far as I know, there is no subdivision application in relation to this. So the couple of references there in the motion, I'm not sure how those came up. I understand it to be a rezoning application. So yes, the council has asked staff to provide a report, which they will be working on and bringing forward on when the public gets involved and when council gets involved, when there's communication, when there's information available. The information is not routinely available during the process, and there is some protection that needs to be provided until such time as a report comes forward to council. If the practice in a community where there's a lot of development happening, and I'm not saying that's where we're headed, but I've come from communities with a lot of development, it's a well-oiled machine. But here there isn't a lot of development, it's rare, so we have to sort of re-educate ourselves and the community and participants on what the normal process is in a local government. So normally, there is no involvement until that staff report hits the council table. And at that point, then that's the opportunity to be asking questions. It's often premature to be going there in advance. Did you have anything to add?
Where I struggle is, and while I won't support the motion itself, for example, items 1, 2, and 3 are just asking for information. And when it came to previous aspects, I informally went to staff asking for information on the applicability of a policy, and I wasn't able to get that. There's a difference between, in my opinion, between influencing and just asking for information. And like I said, the way I view it in terms of what Councillor Coulson has moved, while I won't support it, is asking for information. In my opinion, it's not influencing staff in any way, shape, or form at all. If we're supposed to be in a complete vacuum, the aspect of putting forth a policy and whether or not that policy needs to be changed, etc., we would never be able to do that because we'd have no information. But like I said, unfortunately, I will not support your motion. Any further discussion, Councillor Coulson?
Yeah, just further to that thread, yeah. This is about the third time this section of the community charter has been thrown at us as if we're influencing staff. We got to make a very clear break between asking for information and influencing staff. I'm just asking for information. That's part of my job as a councillor. Ask questions, get information, let the public know what's going on, but that doesn't seem to be appreciated sometimes when it comes to these development applications. That's quite troubling. But just this discussion on this motion tonight, we've learned that Landsville's leaving a lot of money on the table for these development applications. I'm not singling out a specific developer. This motion is, I asked the same question with the Foothills. I'll be asking it for other major developments that come down the pipeline. Very roughly, if all these developments that we saw tonight in the presentation happen, it's around $400 million. Very loose. If Landsville should be getting 20% of that, that's $80 million. That's game-changing money for this community. If we are indeed going to have development, and that's what people want, make it beneficial. It's crazy not to. It's foolish. With this Ryland development, very roughly, the lift.
Yeah. Mr. Coulson, rather than getting into the debating of whether or not we should have a zoning lift to the motion itself, and maybe at a later date consider asking for information on something like the zoning lift.
Okay. $16 million.
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Councillor Swain, Councillor Kolpoff, Councillor Desabart, Mayor Haim opposed, motion defeated. Which gets us to the public clarification and input period, up to 2 minutes. State name and address for the record. Limited to asking clarification regarding business discussed at the meeting. Mr. French, name and address.
And it's not what the handicap is of the Toronto players this year.
You guys were going golfing before we were one night.
My name is Barry French. I live at 7916 South Lynn Drive. I am a member of the OCP committee, which I'm quite pleased to be on. It's quite a learning experience for me, and there's a lot of things that I'm learning that I didn't understand, and it is coming along. However, well, I have a lot to say, but I have 2 minutes. I don't know how the Winds or Winchelsea or any of the other subdivisions ever were developed if they had to go through remotely the rigmarole that they have to do to get developed that I'm hearing here tonight. There is an indicator that we are willing to accept some growth. I don't see how. I hear a lot of negativity that is coming through that leads me to think, and I get it, that the OCP findings and so forth, it's political, and that you people all have the final decision on the way things are going. A certain amount has to be based on the views of the public, and you do have the final say, right, Mr. Hain? Am I?
No, council does.
Council, yes, okay, not specifically. Hopefully, we are going to be able to come to some consensus to allow some growth in this town. You just need to look around the community and you see that the town is stagnating. Probably something like the G property that is not necessarily going to be in the numbers that they are possibly proposing. But my other question about this is, and it kind of caught me, was the issue about First Nations. There was a point here where the question was asked about the development at the far end of Lanceville Road, and the comment was made that we don't know. There's been no discussion about any of this. I understand now, I'm hearing that the G property is possibly going to be developed and the First Nations have concerns about it. I think that's great that there is dialogue between the council and the First Nations, but when have you ever had any say in what goes on over there? I have to make that comment because, and if there is a joint dialogue between the two groups, I think, as I say, I think that's great. But is there any consideration of the potential that they might want to take over the G property?
That's not for us to comment on. Whether or not the First Nations wish to expand their lands, that's up for them to decide. It is private lands, and within the provincial mandate, there is the possibility that First Nations can acquire additional lands.
So my caution is that which would you rather have? That the First Nations take over that area and they develop like they have all of that area below North Wind Drive where they went in and just absolutely clear cut the area, or to have a subdivision.
Mr. French,
yes?
Mr. French, we're not here to debate what.
No, I am coming. My point is, would we have that possible option if that came to fruition, or the fact of whether it was developed like the people on the G property want to? I'm not so sure which would be the lesser, which I would prefer. I think I would almost say that I would rather see a well-developed subdivision happen there than the potential that...
As it stands right now, the lands are within the district of Lanceville, and therefore the OCP committee and also council would consider the zoning and the effect of that as it exists within Lanceville. We have no control over provincial law, legislation, federal law, or legislation.
I'm just editorializing here when I'm saying the fact that we're talking about a development that potentially has 300 units there.
Okay, but keep in mind what we were discussing earlier today was the OCP and the water supply to that land. We weren't getting into a discussion whether or not that land could or would be acquired by First Nation.
Granted. I said it anyway. That's a very politically charged issue, and as I say, I am thrilled to hear that there has been dialogue between the First Nations and the council. And is that happening on a regular basis?
Irregular might be the best word.
And would we be allowed to know who initiated this last
meetings?
At this time, we were invited by the News First Nation to attend at their health center offices for an informal discussion.
Awesome. However, back to the OCP, I think this gentleman stood here, and I'd like to thank councillors who sat here and listened intently and are going to go home and they are going to digest what the gentleman had to say and the paperwork, and there will be a lot of questions throughout the process. But I hope that, like, there was a comment made also about micromanaging the bureaucrats and so forth. I see those issues happening too often where we hire companies to come in and make presentations, or the bureaucrats want to make presentations. And although you have the political decision at the end to decide which way you're going to go, I hope that we are going to stop and fully digest all the ramifications of what we are doing before we start making comments and decisions. Thank you.
Additional public clarification.
Dave Scott, 6898 Harwood Drive. During Mr. Reed's presentation tonight, one thing I noticed, it was on the initial graph that he presented that had the survey results as to which neighborhoods they came back from. And if you looked at those results, there was some discussion tonight. I think Councillor Gieselbach asked some questions about it. We also had some comments about semi-rural nature of Lantzville and that. And the interesting thing that I noted was that if you take the Peterson Road area, which the lots are primarily quarter-acre lots in that area, that represented about 34% of the properties in Lantzville. If you take the Winchelsea area, that was about 15%. So those two areas alone are basically half of the properties in Lantzville, are a third of an acre or less. Now, if you start throwing in Landcrest Terrace and some of the other areas, there's well into the 50-some-odd% of properties in Lantzville are under a third of an acre, which is interesting because we've always had this conversation about the half-acre minimum parcel size in that, and the majority of developed land in Lantzville is smaller than that. Just an interesting observation that I thought everybody should be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional input? Okay. Hearing none. Councillor Colclough, second by Councillor Haynes to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Which you can see there's so